We're very glad also to host Cristian Asinelli. Cristian is the Corporate Vice President of Strategic Programming at CAF, Development Bank of Latin America. He leads the strategy of sovereign financing, technical assistance, generation and dissemination of knowledge with a focus on environmental, sustainability, gender inclusion, physical and digital infrastructure, social development, urban development, as well as the organization's relationship agenda for its countries and the incorporation of new members. He has previously served as Undersecretary for the Evaluation of Externally Financed Projects with the Chief of the Cabinet of Ministers of Argentina, Deputy of the Autonomous City of Buenos Aires, and alternate National Director of the State Modernization Project for the Chief of Cabinet of Ministers. We will also be having in the panel Mr. Federico Pinedo, who was the Argentina Sherpa for the G20. Previously, he served as provisional president of the Argentine Senate from 2015 to 2019, and as a national deputy for the city of Buenos Aires from 2003 to 2015. He has also held the post of elected counsel for the federal capital, an inspector general for the city of Buenos Aires. He's also a lawyer from the University of Buenos Aires. Also, and I see that Luis is arriving. Luis Escaso will be part of the panel. He's the director of the Organization of Ibero-American States Diplomatic Representation in Argentina and director of the Ibero-American Chair of Regional Integration for all 22 member countries. Before joining the OEI in 2000, he served as program officer at UNESCO, official staff at UNESCO, Argentina's National Commission, consultant at the Argentina National Director for International Cooperation, among other positions. He holds a bachelor degree in political science from the Universidad El Salvador and a master's degree in innovation and education technology from Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Finally, Cynthia Thermosius was appointed Deputy Minister for the G7 Summit and personal representative of the Prime Minister of Canada for the G7 and G20 Summit on June 25, 2024. She previously served as Associate Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and before that, she held the positions of Assistant Deputy Minister of Security and Emergency Management, Director General of International Security Policy, and Deputy Head of Mission in China, and then the umbrella of Global Affairs Canada. So we have a great panel. We have a great book to discuss, and with that, I see the microphone to Cristian Asinelli for some introductory words, and then to Jorge for the presentation of the book. Thanks, Cristian.
Well, good evening for everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this presentation of the book, The Challenge of the American Countries at the G20 in its English version, because we already published this book in Spanish with Jorge. Here at the Georgetown Americas Institute, I would like to especially thank the president of the Embajada Abierta Foundation and former Argentine ambassador to the United States, Jorge Arguello, among other responsibilities, who took the initiative to develop this great achievement. Congratulations, Jorge, and thank you for this book. Also to the Georgetown American Institute funding director, Alejandro Werner, with whom we work so much at CAF. Thank you, Alejandro, for all your help in the last years. To the organization of Ibero-American State Director to Argentina, Luis Escaso, and in his name to Mariano Jabonero, a strategic ally in Ibero-America and education issues. And to the Sherpas, to the G20, Cynthia Thermosius and Federico Pinedo. Federico also was former president of Argentina, among other responsibilities. And all of you for attending to this event. I think that the publication emerged from the collaboration to the three institutions plus OAE in the English version. The Embajada Abierta everybody knows, is an institution that seeks to rethink diplomacy from new perspective. Universidad Argentina de la Empresa, a higher education institution in our country. And CAF, a multilateral organization that works for the integration and sustainability development of Latin American and Caribbean countries. Although our institution work to achieve different objectives, I think that the spirit of this book is the same. That is, all organizations from and for the Americas must collaborate to position our region on the global stage. And every challenge that geopolitical change define for our countries will be faced in a stronger, more robust and consensual manner if we work together. With that goal in mind, we work every day in our institution as a regional development bank. And in our institution, we not only finance large infrastructure projects, that is the core of our business, we also generate knowledge and promote the development of knowledge to accompany the course and socioeconomic trend of our institution and our countries. Last year, we were fortunate that the G20 took place in our region, in Brazil, and that allowed Latin America and the Caribbean to be at the center of global discussion in areas such as climate action, poverty, energy transition, among others. The same will be happening this year at the COP in Belém, where the region will have the opportunity to showcase to the world its knowledge, lesson learned, and its true capacity to generate local solution to global problems. And the COP will be in the Amazonas. That is a very good news. I don't want to forget to mention the important work we do with universities. We have agreement and cooperation tool with more than 30 educational institutions which work in our government and leadership programs. And Shorten University is not an exception. We have collaborated with institutions in the last 15 years in programs like the leadership program from global competitiveness, the diploma in governance and public innovation, research progress projects such as LACOM, and more recently, the signing of a memorandum of understanding in 2022 for the exchange of publication and academic research with the Shorten American Institute. Here in Washington, as you know, we have been leading our traditional CAF conference for the last 30 years, together with the Inter-American Dialogue and with the Organization of American States. Everybody knows that each year we debate with policymakers, international figures, global leaders about political, economical, social trends that affect our region and the position we have in the world. We also work year after year with the UN. We have signed more than 40 instruments with more than 20 entities of the US system where Jorge worked for a lot of time in areas such as agriculture, finance, education, employment, health, governments, among others. I don't want to fail to mention something that fills us with pride as a multilateral organization. Last year, we were the first bank in the region to join the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, led by Brazil under its G20 presidency. As you know, over the last 57 years, we have grown from 6 Andean countries to become a multilateral organization with action through the 25 Latin American and Caribbean countries. Currently, we have those 25 countries supporting us, and we expect it to end the year with more. When we joined the institution in 2025 with Sergio Díaz-Granados, the president of CAF, we set out to capitalize the bank, and we did, expand its structure, and we did, and enter the Caribbean to support those countries with great need. And we did, and we continue working with the Caribbean also. And we did all this because we are very clear that our task it's to position the region as an international player, a decision maker, an authoritative voice in the global system. In March 2024, during the 8th summit of CELAC, President Lula stated that if we speak as a region, we have more possibilities to influence the great debate of today. And if we act together, we create synergies that strengthen our individual and development projects. This book and our daily work pursue that goal, and I have no doubt that consensus, the alignment of position and joint effort are fundamental to reaching a common approach that strengthens our region in the face of the war. Last year, Pope Francis participated in G7 session in Italy, where he assured the world's main leaders that instruments such as artificial intelligence are both fascinating and tremendous at the same time. And he left a key lesson for the whole world. In the face of the drama of armed conflict that characterizes our present, it is urgent to rethink development, commitment, and human control over tools such as the artificial intelligence. This is because no algorithms can override human decision and his heart. In some way, I think that this book is trying to go in this address. Thank you very much.
Am I right here? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank especially the Georgetown American Institute for this gathering, Alejandro Werner, Denise Yanovich, equipo del Instituto, muchas gracias. I'm really happy to be here again, to be back in Washington. As it was said, I served as ambassador of my country in 2 different occasions. So in some way, Washington is also my home. I'm very happy to see so many familiar faces with whom I have worked along the years. So allow me to make my presentation by saying that I have been involved in the G20 in various roles and formats since 2008, the year when President George W. Bush called the first summit of heads of state and government of the forum here in Washington, D.C. As you know, the forum itself was created in 1999 by the G7 at the initiative of the US and Canada after a decade of financial crisis that erupted in what could be called the periphery. Its main goal was to prevent contagion effects due to the incorporation of the main emerging economies into a group that, together with the G7, ended up being the G20. A precedent for the expansion of the G7 to emerging economies can be found in 1998, when the G7 became the G8 by incorporating the Russian Federation. It wasn't due to economic reasons. Russia was not an advanced economy at the level of the other G7 members. The decision was driven by geopolitical, strategic, and diplomatic considerations. The aim was to broaden the G7's legitimacy by presenting it as a more representative forum, including both developed economies and a major emerging power. When I talk about the series of financial crises that broke out in the 1990s, I think, for example, of the Mexican crisis, 1994, 1995, and the so-called tequila effect that followed. I also recall the successive crises of Turkey, 1994, 1998, 2001. Also the collapse of the Asian tigers in 1997, which began
with the downfall of Thailand's economy and finances, but also dragged down South Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia, where Suharto's regime fell. I remember South Africa's crisis, which coincided with its independence year. In 1998, the crisis of Russia and Brazil followed, and the cycle closed in 2001 with Argentina. It is clear that the first iteration of the G20 in the late 1990s was a defensive effort by the G7. By acknowledging the rise of emerging economies, the G7 sought to contain the shockwaves from the periphery in an era of global economic and financial interconnection. But it is important to highlight that the G20 also represented an effort by the G7 to expand its geographical representation and accept ideological and economic model differences. So, India and Brazil were added along with Communist China. The fear of a massive crisis justified adapting to the new reality and inviting the emerging economies on board. From 1999 to 2008, this forum was operated at the level of finance ministers and central bank governors from its 20 member countries. In 2008, I was living in New York, serving as Argentina's permanent representative to the United Nations. Here is the ambassador of Brazil, Maria Luisa, my friend. We shared that position in New York, and after that, we coincided here in Washington. 2008, I was saying, a new crisis erupted. But unlike the earlier ones, this time it was originated at the very heart of the financial world, Wall Street. The crisis threatened to spread globally, and this led to a pivotal decision. President Bush called for an extraordinary meeting of the heads of state of the 20 member countries in Washington, D.C. From then on, the heads of state continued to meet at least once a year in member capitals. I was part of the Argentine delegation at the 2008 Washington summit. And after that, I kept participating in the G20 in different ways. Later, from civil society and as president of the Embajada Abierta Foundation, I participated in the G20, Think Tank 20, in various processes from Germany to Japan. Between 2020 and 2023, it was said, I served as the Argentine Sherpa in the summits of Saudi Arabia, Italy, Indonesia, and India. Now, historically, the G20 has been divided into two major groups: developed countries and emerging economies. The G7 or G8, and I think we can say the rest of the world. Negotiations between these two blocs form the foundation of the annual final declaration signed by the heads of state. However, considering the ongoing transformation of the international reality, it is worth asking whether this rigid framework of negotiations between two blocs is still sufficient or efficient. In my experience, I've noticed distinct subgroups within each bloc, often with divergent interests. Similarly, affinities sometimes emerge between countries from opposite groups. These affinities can lead to interesting dynamics. For instance, in 2023, during India's presidency, while no formal coalitions were established on the topic between developed and emerging countries, key actors from both blocs collaborated on climate financing. The main negotiators were not the blocs themselves, but certain countries from each side. The US and the European Union on the one side, and India and Brazil on the other. I well remember the many efforts undertaken by the American Sherpa Dalip Singh and the European Union leaders Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen, as well as India's Sherpa Amitabh Kant and Brazil's Mauricio Carvalho Lirio. A positive development for the forum is the African Union's inclusion as the 21st permanent member in 2024. However, the African Union's membership will not prevent individual African countries from negotiating bilaterally with nations from other continents, be they emerging or be they G7 members, before the African Union solidifies its group position. And this pattern applies to all regional groupings. This gave rise to the idea of a book that would explore new avenues for consensus within the G20 that go beyond the rigid classification of developed versus emerging economies. Breaking this dichotomy is crucial for achieving global solutions that are more inclusive, more adaptive, more sustainable. And there are different reasons for this. Number one, the rigidity of this division limits negotiations. Two, some countries, like China, combine characteristics of both categories. Three, encouraging countries to group around specific topics, energy transition, food security, technological regulation, fosters dynamic alliances that reflect shared priorities rather than predefined divisions. Four, negotiating based on specific interests can lead to more concrete agreements. Five, promoting heterogeneous coalitions reinforces the perception of the G20 as a truly global forum. And six, initiatives like this do facilitate the strengthening of bridges between regions, Latin America and Asia, Africa and Oceania, North and South America, etc. Overcoming the division between developed and emerging countries in the G20 is not only desirable, but necessary. Negotiating from common interest instead of rigid blocks allows for better responses to complex global challenges, strengthens multilateralism, and advances more inclusive solutions. We live in a world without indisputable leadership, with a cascade of interests that are more crossed, opposed, overlapping, and dynamic than ever before. There is no single North, and there is no single South. In light of this, we must ask ourselves, what is the role and potential of the Americas as a continent in this geopolitical landscape? Can its countries transform old regional hegemonies and dynamics into a new formula that benefits everyone? What agreements and agendas should be pursued? Undoubtedly, this book represents a collective effort aimed at building those essential bridges in our region. It provides various clues to guide us. In an interesting passage of his book preface, Christian Asinelli defines the Americas as a solution region, referring to its vast reserves of water, natural resources, ecosystem solutions, clean energy matrices, food production, and world-class human capital. From Argentina, Federico Pinedo highlights that this work represents a meeting point between the countries of the North and the South, developed and emerging, G7, BRICS, and independents, addressing all the same subject from different perspectives. From Brazil, Mauricio Carvalho Lirio agrees with Pinedo in advocating for the reform of global governance structures. He reminds us that only 4 African countries participated in the 1945 San Francisco Conference of the UN. Now Africa has 54 countries, and the African Union has become a permanent member in the G20 during the Brazilian presidency. From Canada, I hope Cindy is already streaming us. From Canada, Cindy Termorsuisen and Christopher McLennan emphasize a historical fact. The initiative to create such a forum began in the late 1990s, when economic turmoil shook the Americas. And insightful ministers like Paul Martin from Canada and his American colleague, Larry Summers, recognized that common interest, financial and economic in this case, were at stake for the entire continent. We can think that if Martin and Summers had not understood that this was a structural phenomenon involving the entire American continent and all the continents, the G20 would not have started to move forward. The crisis in Asia and Russia proved them right. Something to stress. Canada applauded Brazil's initiative during its G20 leadership to prioritize social inclusion on the agenda, a condition that should remain a continental priority due to the macro imbalances it is causing in terms of migration. The former Sherpa from the US, Dalip Singh, states that, and I quote him, "The great challenge of our time respect no borders," unquote, and cites an old American saying, "Never waste a good crisis." Regarding the current situation in the region, he says that if the US found common interests during the financial crisis of the 1990s and 2008, it can do so again now. From Mexico, the former Sherpa, Jennifer Feller, she is with us on the stream, mentions agreements with Argentina regarding financing for middle-income countries and debt, and with Brazil regarding poverty and food insecurity to advance initiatives within the G20. This should be highlighted as an example of emerging articulation among American countries in the forum. The mere fact that the 5 American countries that have been G20 members since its inception agreed to participate in a book titled "The Challenge of the American Countries at the G20" confirms the need to explore this still unknown territory. The participation of each Sherpa in this work reflects a political decision that goes beyond the individuals themselves and requires the approval of the highest authorities in each government. Let us not forget that the Sherpas are the personal representatives of the heads of state. So, these are the reasons why this small group of men and women from various G20 countries in the Americas came together to write this book and through it contribute to fostering this important debate. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I will invite Federico Pinedo to join me at the table, and we probably will be connecting with Cindy. She's already here.
Cynthia, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
We can't hear you. Could you talk again?
Yes, I'm speaking.
Perfect. Yes, we can hear
now.
us.
Yep, I can hear you. Yes, I can.
We can't hear you. Could you talk again? Sorry, that's an echo.
Yes,
We're fixing
I'm
it.
speaking.
Perfect. Yes, we can hear
now.
us. Sorry.
I'm speaking.
If we are ready, Cindy, I don't know. Oh, yeah, Cindy, hello?
Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yes, we do. Nice to see you, Cindy. You are in front of me and in my back. But you are very well.
Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yes, we do. Nice to see you, Cindy. You are in front of me and in my back. But you are very well.
Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yes, we do. Nice to see you, Cindy. You are in front of me and in my back. But you are very well.
Hear me?
Yes, we do. A ver ahora, Cindy. Are we now in the same frequency?
I hope so.
Yeah, good to see you. Then you're very welcome. We are here gathering at Georgetown Americas Institute in Georgetown University. Happy to be presenting this book and with the expectation of listening what you have to share with us.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues and longstanding G20 partners, and also wonderful to see my G20 colleagues, former and present at the table. I've had the privilege of serving as Canada's G7 Sherpa since May 2023, and as G20 Sherpa since the end of June last year. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to address you virtually today to speak about Canada's contribution to this really important regional initiative. When Canada was invited to take part in this book project, I thought it was useful to focus Canada's contribution on two things. First of all, to look back at the past 25 years of Canadian engagement at the G20 table, but also to share some thoughts on how we can come together to confront current challenges and better deliver results for everyone. And as Ambassador Arguello mentioned in his remarks, which I was listening to earlier, Canada played a founding role in the creation and development of the G20, particularly through the leadership of our former Prime Minister, Paul Martin. And reflecting on the past 25 years of the G20's efforts made me realize just how innovative we can all get when we come together as a common front to address global challenges. And I think it's fair to say that from the beginning, the G20 Forum aimed at achieving two key objectives. One was to coordinate macroeconomic cooperation and crisis response efforts, and the other was to work together to ensure that the fruits of globalization were shared by all. And so when the G20 was elevated to the leaders level in response to the global financial crisis in 2008, Canada continued to play a strong bridge building and convening role. For instance, we supported the creation of the Financial Stability Board, which has helped foster a more resilient global financial system. Now, during the past 2 decades, the G20 has faced waves of cascading challenges, from financial crises to interstate conflicts to global health crises. And our countries have had to grapple with these challenges alongside a whole range of social, environmental, and development issues. But through it all, I think G20 members have risen to the occasion, using the forum as a space for economic cooperation and governance, a forum which complements and supports other multilateral institutions, and still offering a unique bridge building function. And I've heard before, and I actually think it's true, that if the G20 didn't exist, we would probably need to invent it. So at a time of, frankly, increased skepticism about multilateralism and its value, I think this book project really helps showcase why multilateralism matters and how bodies like the G20 have helped generate concrete solutions to the biggest issues of our time. And the world is arguably at a tipping point. Countries, on one hand, are more connected and reliant on each other than ever before, but the knock-on effects of global crises are hindering progress on crucial priorities. And as new challenges emerge and geopolitical tensions heighten, we need to continue to adapt our institutions to ensure they are fit for purpose and can actually help address the challenges that we're currently facing. I would argue that the existential challenges of our time require more collective action, not less. And I think it's fair to say that the G20 remains one of the very few spaces where leaders of the leading developed and emerging economies sit face to face every year to discuss the most challenging issues of our time. And also their ministers do the same, and their Sherpas do the same. So this is a very comprehensive forum where we can work through these challenging issues. And if you think back, when COVID-19 brought the world virtually to a standstill, G20 members were key to responding to that challenge. Members also worked together, as was previously done during the global financial crisis in 2008, to channel rapid, collective responses needed to address the economic and social impacts of the pandemic. And as we commemorate today, the third year of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I would be remiss not to address this as well. When Russia, a member of the G20, launched its war of aggression against Ukraine, G20 members firmly condemned this flagrant violation of international law. Canada worked closely with partners in our region to call for an immediate end to this terrible conflict, which has undermined our collective efforts to build a peaceful, rules-based order. And Canada remains firmly committed to promoting a just and durable peace in Ukraine while working together to foster solutions to other major global conflicts. And there are many more with enormous impacts on the well-being of people around the world. So as we witness the spillover effects of conflicts on the global economy, it's crucial that the G20 continues to stand up for international law and the UN Charter. And so the serious economic challenges that face the world today, including debt vulnerabilities, poverty, and inequality, they remind us that the G20's mandate is just as important today as it was when the G20 was first created. So focusing in on the things that the G20 does best, while working together as a region to identify areas where we can add value, could go a long way in achieving more optimal outcomes. The crucial macroeconomic and financial stabilization work conducted through the G20 has helped us bounce back from financial crises and build resilience against future threats. And so if the past few decades of global crisis management have taught us anything, it's that economic challenges and social, political, and environmental issues are deeply interrelated. The G20 has not only helped confront major economic crises, but has also helped our countries to achieve steady progress in the pursuit of social, environmental, and development priorities. And Canada's been very supportive of the G20 priorities of our partners from the Americas, with a strong focus on social inclusion and sustainable development, including Mexico and Argentina during their respective presidencies in 2012 and 2018, and Brazil just last year. We have worked closely at the G20 table to scale up financing for sustainable development, to ensure that multilateral development banks in our region are well equipped, to promote gender equality, and to help improve the effectiveness of climate and environment funds. The Americas region has benefited from the strong focus on inclusive growth at the G20. So as we prepare for the G20 summit in South Africa this year, with a focus on fostering equality and prosperity for all, I look forward to continued collaboration with our partners in the region to advance our shared objectives. Strengthening multilateral development banks and improving trade relations in the Americas can stimulate inclusive growth and can help address problems at their root. Ultimately, achieving better results through the G20 will require us to hold ourselves accountable for the commitments that we make every year. Better implementation of G20 commitments and initiatives will help deliver concrete benefits for our people in our countries, in our region, and beyond. And so as Canada's G7 presidency has officially kicked off this year, I look forward to leveraging my role, both as G7 and G20 Sherpa, to build bridges with our partners and work together to foster a multilateral system and a global economy that truly works for all of us. Canada is going to continue championing multilateral cooperation. We believe that the advancement of our national interests is tightly bound up in the advancement of regional and global interests. So issues may seem contentious and gridlocked at the moment, but we need to keep working through our differences and working to build consensus, recognizing that the interests and values that unite us are ultimately greater than the things that draw us apart. So I'd like to again sincerely thank Ambassador Arguello and his foundation for spearheading this book project and for extending this invitation to discuss its ideas further. And a very special thanks to Georgetown's Americas Institute for convening this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cindy. Please, before I forget, I ask you to send my best personal regards to Christopher McLennan, my friend, with whom I have shared this position along 4 years. You have mentioned 5 times the word consensus. And I think it's indispensable to do it because, as you have said, the challenges that we are facing are demanding the adaptation of the current multilateral institutions. So that's the reason why we are working on this book. Now I have the pleasure to present my old good friend, Federico Pinedo. We know each other. We have been knowing each other for the last 40 or 50 decades. Federico is not only an old friend of mine, but he is a man with very, very important political responsibilities in the current government of Argentina. Even though I do not belong to the government, we do work together in many things regarding precisely the international agenda. So I have the pleasure to introduce you, Federico Pinedo.
Well, thank you, Jorge. Nice to see you, Cindy. We sit together, Argentina and Canada, because of the letters of the countries. So we used to work closer than all the other Sherpas. Well, my reflection will be about the erosion of multilateralism. It's quite clear that multilateralism, which is a bet in cooperation and in enforcing common commitments regarding the rule of law, the international rule of law, the respect for the UN Charter, is eroding. And the question is why? In my view, of course, G20 is a multilateral fora, so its mandate is to try to figure out how to help the global community to work in different paths. And the responsibility is to try to put together the vision of countries that represent something like 80% of the global GDP, no? In my view, multilateralism has been challenged several times in the last years, and that has its consequences. It's not free to break the rules. And in my view, that happened several times in the last years in Iraq, in Georgia, in Crimea, and nothing happened with all those cases. And we are suffering now the results, the consequences of that, especially after the invasion of Russia to the territory of Ukraine. That was a real challenge and let's say, I can't remember in Spanish neither. Sí, desafío to the global set of rules that order the global system of living together in peace. So that was also an answer to the previous unilateralism, which also had consequences. In my view, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the hegemony of the US, that created important changes in multilateralism. And I can see at least two kinds of multilateralism. The first one is the political, which is the origin of the UN, which objectives were two. The first one, not to destroy humanity, and the second one, to reach peace. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the USSR, it seemed like we are going to be living in a world of peace, and it seemed like one country will be in charge of maintaining the security of the world, and the other ones may free ride that situation. So the multilateral organizations began to work in some other aspects of life, which I will call the cultural multilateralism, more focused on other issues, on gender issues, on climate issues, on poverty or equality or different other aspects of life and of societies. The present situation is one in which countries are against or in favor of these two different kinds of organizations or institutions or compromises. In our continent, we have, in the Americas, in our hemisphere, we have all the countries in more or less different positions. And that's complicated in order to have common ground and common objectives, which we have tried to show and to strengthen in the book and afterwards. No, we have had meetings after the book or because of the book in the Brazilian G20 presidency, meeting all the Americas Sherpas together. But for instance, I have seen Brazil and Mexico, Brazil, with a special position regarding Russia and Ukraine, with the BRICS, no? They have voted in abstention in the UN when that was challenged by the UN. And that was a challenge for the rules-based system of the UN and UN Charter principles. And that was a problem for the UN and international law, of course, which is the basis for living together in peace. On the other hand, certain countries of the Americas, Mexico, Canada, Brazil, in certain moments Argentina and the US, were supportive of the cultural multilateralism. But now we have President Trump and President Milei that have positioned themselves stating that they don't want their countries to be ruled by domestic policies established or impulsed by the international organizations. They want to be open to fix their own domestic policies and not to be subject to mandates of international organizations. And that is in some way against what I call the cultural multilateralism. So when you hear the positions of the countries of the G20, we have had recently a ministers' meeting in South Africa. And in this meeting, I first hear several countries stressing that it was absolutely important, of course, to respect the UN Charter, to respect international law, but more than that, 2 or 3 countries have said that the breaking of the commitments and duties and obligations established by the UN Charter should be penalized and should be controlled and should be responded by a collective action. This is the first time I hear in the G20 a call for a collective action against those who break the rules. No, in my view, this shows a preoccupation, a worry about the situation that might go out of control. No? So I think it's important to value the political multilateralism and to sustain it. In the words of one of the ministers these days, because the international law is not supposed to be the tool for the powerful, but the guarantee of security for all the countries. So probably we are going to, and hopefully we are going to be facing a new step in the G20 performance, trying to push a compromise to act in the case of the breaking of the international law. I hope we can go to that step, and I hope that the current negotiations for peace in Ukraine and Israel be successful during this year. But well, we are at the moment just being involved in all the situation and trying to help.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Federico. I want you to know, and Cindy, that Jennifer Ferrer just wrote me from Mexico City, congratulating you too for your speeches. And I think we still have some time, so I would like to open the floor. We have the privilege of having Cindy from Canada, Federico Pinedo from Argentina. The two of them have the responsibility of representing their presidents at the G20 summit. So I invite you to do your reflections or ask the questions you may have to our two Sherpas. Okay, here in the first row, young man, you have the floor.
Hi, yeah. Hi, my name is Luis from Argentina. If you had to choose a problem that the G20 has to resolve nowadays, what would that be?
If you agree, Cindy, Federico will go first, and then we'll listen to you.
Well, you know that G20 is a forum that specifically says that it's not going to be in charge of security issues, which evidently are the most important problems in this moment. Nevertheless, there is another internal rule of G20 that establishes that the foreign relations ministers can talk of whatever they want, and the same for the presidents. So in those meetings, the geopolitical issues are central. And we can't look to other place when we realize that if we are in war, you cannot speak about climate change or gender or poverty or production or whatever, no? Trade, health, education, because the impact of war destroys everything. So, well, we have that contradiction inside us. But I think that the G20 working groups, which are something like 20-something, can work together in order to put in place coordination between domestic policies in order to reach and to confront global problems, reach solutions and confront global problems. But on the other hand, the ministers and the presidents that meet in the G20, of course, they are going to confront with geopolitical main conflicts, which are very big at present. Probably there are only one conflict all around the world, no?
Thanks, Federico. Cindy, we are ready to listen to you.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question. I guess I would make a couple of observations. First, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, the G20 started as really a financial and economic body. And so I do think the G20 remains particularly well equipped to deal with those kinds of issues because of how it's structured, the strength of its finance and central bank governors track. And so I think that is just a strength of the G20 because of how it's designed. So I would say that's one area. The second area I would say is dealing with crisis. And I think that Federico is right that, you know, dealing with the geopolitical crises is hard for the G20. I think there's a place for, the G20 to discuss them. But I think where you've seen the G20 be really strong in the past is dealing with crises like the 2008 financial crisis, like COVID. So, I think Federico's right. There are a lot of different working groups, a lot of different issues at different levels that can be worked through. But I would say the real strength of the G20 writ large, from my personal perspective, has really been shown on those like deep, hard financial issues and also the crisis management piece.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Cindy. I see here in the second row, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much for this effort of preparing this book. I think it's a very important project, and the time for very special. So the G20 was built to fix things in the world, but some people argue that we need to fix the fixer now, right? Of course, you have to spend most of your time trying to solve the problems in the world, but to some extent, you have also to devote at least a fraction of your time to keep evolving and improving the tool. So the question would be, in the current context, which kind of reforms do you think the G20 needs and can be reasonable achieved?
I think that G20 needs more focus in less thing, in few things, no, fewer. We have lots of working groups. They overlapped continuously. Each country creates a new task force and groupings in order to solve certain problems, and that's not a good practice in my view. No, so several of ours are trying to reduce the working groups and reduce the subjects in which we are going to work, because if not, you just talk and talk and talk, and you don't go deeper into common problems, and increasingly one tries to put on the table its own point of view, and well, this is not the way probably to focus on more specific and great goals to be achieved.
Thank you, Federico. Cindy, would you like to say something?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is actually South Africa is sort of asking itself the same question this year as the host. And as you may know, South Africa is the last in the cycle. So all G20 countries will now have hosted. And so they're actually looking back over the last 20 years to look at what have we done well and what haven't we. So I think your point that it's time to look at the organization and the group itself in terms of effectiveness, I think is shared. And there's going to be an exercise this year to look at it. So I think it's really timely.
Thanks a lot, Cindy. I don't know if there is any other reflection or comment or question. I will propose then to Cindy and Federico regarding the region, regarding the reality of the 5 American countries. I will propose an imagination exercise. I wonder, if you were in charge, what would be the first step you would propose in order to reach an agreement, a regional agreement, to be brought to the plenary of the G20? Now I will invert the answers, and I give you the floor, Cindy. It's an exercise, I understand. We have not been trained in this direction.
Well, it's an interesting question. because I'll maybe put a question back to you. You know, when you have a global grouping of countries like the G20, how effective is it to bring regional issues that aren't crises? Because I stress crises, I think, are something that, you know, these more global groups can respond effectively to. But how effective is it to bring it to the G20? Is that the right place? Because often when I look at, for instance, as the G7 Sherpa, because we're the presidency now, I think, is the G7 the place we should be talking about this issue, or do we need to bring it somewhere else? So, you know, I think a lot would depend on what we were trying to do. If we were trying to do something that we were experimenting on in the region as something that might become a global issue, like looking at different ways of looking at trade or managing regional development banks and how that might be applied globally, maybe that would be the kind of thing. But I always think we need to be careful to bring regional specific issues to these large groupings, unless everyone else around the table feels, hey, I like this, this is relevant to me.
Of course, it's correct. My question was oriented to not the regional agenda, because it's not correct to bring the regional agenda or the regional problematic to the general agenda. But it's possible to build regional proposals for the general agenda. No, I'm thinking of the war in Ukraine, and I'm thinking the situation in Africa, I'm thinking in the situation in Middle East. So the different topics that conform the G20 agenda. Federico.
Okay, I'll do my effort. An important part of the G20 goals, one of the three main goals probably is development. And I think that the Americas, the hemisphere, has a lot of things to do in order to push the development of the whole region. I'm thinking in infrastructure, for instance. I'm thinking in reducing the cost of logistics in order to be more competitive because of better ports and railways and connectivity and services that push the productivity, technological issues, and so on. And all those things that can be done in our region and deserve a common work, thinking in a region, are also issues that we impulse in the G20. I mean, trying to strengthen development, to develop connectivity, to develop infrastructure, to work together in different things that might be something like online education, job capacity development, and so on. So perhaps the things that we say that the world should do are the things that we can actually do by ourselves in the region.
Muy bien. I think we are running out of time. If there is any actual question to be done, please.
Hi, thank you. Congratulations to all of you for this fabulous book. I I was wondering if you could maybe expand. The G20 has these parallel bodies for the business sector, for the think tanks, for women. And I'm wondering, as you think about the future of the G20, what is the role? What could we be doing better in terms of integrating not only governments, but also the role of the private sector, the role of civil society? What can we be doing better as we engage in the G20 framework from all those angles? Thank you and congratulations again.
Thank you for the question. Federico.
Well, those groups are called engagement groups. In my experience, there is some problem in hearing the private sector of all the countries with the ministers of all the countries, because the private sector in all the countries think very different, have very different approaches to the issues, and so I understand and I'm comfortable by having our officials being in contact with domestic engagement groups and civil society, working together in order to put on the table the national policies regarding each subject, but to hear the whole civil society of the whole world, which is so plural and diverse, is a factual, complicated issue. So we have enormous meetings with lots of people talking, but in half an hour or so, people don't hear anymore because there are so many things that are said and things that go and go and go the same in the same way. So I think we need to rethink the participation of the civil societies in order to be more useful for the civil society and for the officials of all the countries.
Bien, clear.
Maybe I'll just add to that because I really agree with you, Federico, and I must apologize. I'm going to need to drop off in about 1 minute, but I think I would say that I would make 2 points. One is I think individual country members of the G20 need to be engaging more with their own business, civil society, think tank communities. That's number one, because I think Federico is right. Like the global piece is so complicated. I think the input can very helpfully happen at the national level where that's a bit more manageable and it can feed into country positions. Second, I think the input needs to happen much earlier. A lot of the big events of the B20 and the C20 and so on happen the week or the month before the Leaders Summit. It's actually really late to get inputs into the system by that time because Sherpas and ministers have been working for many, many months on these issues. So a much earlier engagement could actually enable more effective engagement and more meaningful collaboration between governments and these various pieces of civil society and the business community. And again, thank you so much for allowing me to participate, but I will be dropping off now. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Cindy. We are almost closing this gathering. I wonder if there is any specific question to be done. Guillermo Arias, please, from the third row.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations, first of all, on the book. My name is Guillermo Arias, and I represent BMW Group for Latin America and the Caribbean. My question has to do with climate change and seeing the position of the new administration pulling out of the Paris Agreement. How do you foresee G20 working towards the goals of COP and climate change and also climate finance through the international multilateral lending institutions? How do you see the G20 managing this topic in the years to come? Thank you.
Well, the G20 in all the working groups puts an eye on the climate change issue, no? In my view, there is a discussion in whether the climate change is produced by human beings or by the cycles of nature. That's a discussion, a scientific discussion, I mean. Well, there are people that say one thing and people that say some other. Regarding my country, it's a theoretical discussion because Argentina is clearly part of the solution and not part of the problem, no? Argentina is a very strong producer of the minerals of the energy transition, I mean, copper and lithium and so on. And it's a very huge food producer with systems that reduce the impact on the carbon emissions. They have lots of ways of capturing carbon in different technical ways. So for us, it's not a problem that affects us in our production, no? On the contrary, we are, as I say, we have huge gas reserves which can serve as the transition energy before the clean energies, and we are producers of nuclear energy and so on. So it's not a problem for our production. It's a discussion we have in theoretical terms. For some other countries, this is not so. There are some countries that sign everything that you can write about climate change, but on the other hand, they are oil producers, and they say, well, yeah, this is a problem, but we are going to continue producing oil. And you have countries like Germany that are the ones that are at the front of the fight against climate change, and they have decided to stop all the nuclear energy in Germany, and now they have something like 40% of the production of energy based on coal, you know, and they put the finger up about climate change and so on. So it's a real problem. For some countries, it's worse because they pollute a lot with their production, so waste of production. And climate change is not a discussion on whether it exists or not, but on which are the causes of that, no? So, well, I don't understand very well the discussion but in practice, all these discussions doesn't change much things up to now, when the US president has told its fellow citizens to dig and dig and dig, and that will have an impact, of course. But, well, that's up to the Americans to decide.
Gracias, Federico. Okay. The Ibero-American Organization es OEI en español, Organización de Estados Iberoamericanos, is part of this book. Mariano Jabonero, its Secretary General, couldn't make it to Washington, but he has sent us a special representative. Luis Escaso is the regional director in Argentina, based in Argentina, of the OEI. So I invite Luis Escaso to join us here just to close this gathering. You're very welcome, Luis. Take the floor.
Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you, Georgetown University, and thank you all of you, of course. It is an honor to close this insightful discussion on the challenge of the American countries at the G20. Let me give first a little brief introduction about OEI. The Organization of Ibero-American States, now celebrating 75th anniversary, stands as the oldest and most influential multilateral organization dedicated to cooperation among Spanish and Portuguese-speaking nations. With 23 member states, 20 offices in the region, and more than 400 cooperation programs, it has a strong territorial presence in the region. The OEI was recently recognized as an observer organization at the United Nations General Assembly. Also, aware participation in the last G20 summit, making a historic first for the OEI, coincided with the approval of the global strategy against hunger and poverty. Let's go to the book. Ambassador Jorge Arguello, in his introduction, frames the book within the reality of a world in transformation, one where the traditional geopolitical device giving way to a more fragmented and dynamic order. He reminds us that the Americas have the responsibility not just to react to global changes, but to actively shape them through strategic multilateral engagement. Speaking about Latin America, one of the central themes of this book is the need of redefining Latin America's role in the G20. The region has often been seen as a peripheral actor, but as Arguello and other contributors emphasize, its vast natural resources, emerging markets, and cultural wealth position it as a key player in global governance. The challenge lies in moving beyond short-term alignments and embracing long-term commitments to cooperation. Latin Americas, as a solution region, as Cristiana Sinelli pointed out, is another key idea that runs through this book. Mr. Jabonero, who is our Secretary General, underscores how the region, biodiversity, clean energy, potential, and human capital should be framed not as vulnerabilities, but as assets. He highlights how education, culture, and technology are not only fundamental for regional development, but also serve as the foundation for Latin America's engagement in global forums like G20. By prioritizing educational equity, fostering cultural and scientific diplomacy, and embracing technological innovation, the region can project a vision of sustainable and inclusive growth. This perspective shifts the narrative from dependency to agency, highlighting how Latin America can contribute to addressing global challenges rather than merely react to them. Considering the role of middle powers in shaping the global governance, Latin America, through G20 members, has the potential to act as a bridge between developed and developing nations. By leveraging its unique position, the region can facilitate consensus building and advocate for more equitable global policies. This sentiment echoes historical precedents, such as the bilateral agreement between Argentina and Brazil to renounce military application of nuclear energy, thereby consolidating Latin America as a region of peace. Multilateralism, as explored by several authors in this book, is not merely an abstract ideal, but a practical necessity.
Latin American influence in the G20 will depend on its ability to present coordinated positions rather than fragmented national interests. The book calls for a stronger regional mechanism that can ensure unified voice on critical issues such as trade, climate policy, and digital transformation. Let's get back to general ideas. Cooperation, collaboration, and mutual assistance are intrinsic to human nature. Indeed, to almost all living beings. Biological systems rely on cooperation for survival, a principle that humans extends to social coexistence. That is based in confidence. Confidence deriving from Latin, con, together, fidere, faith, or loyalty. It is the essential foundation of cooperation. Without it, without confidence, agreements remain fragile and alliances superficial. As history has shown, leaving foreign policy solely to the shifting balance of interest and power struggles has led to tragic consequences. Conversely, collaboration, multilateralism, and mutual understanding have demonstrated tangible benefits for regional and global stability. The book argues that institutional mechanisms must be strengthened to ensure continuity regardless of electoral shifts, and that diplomatic engagement should be anchored in a vision that transcends individual administrations. Perhaps the most important lesson of this book is that multilateral cooperation is not an option, but an imperative. The challenges we face in the Americas, economic volatility, environmental crisis, and geopolitical instability, among others, demand a collective action. As Arguello eloquently puts it, the region must move beyond ideological pendulum swings and establish a stable foundation for inter-American collaboration. We must recognize that freedom does not diminish where another begins. Rather, as Mario Casaglia suggests, freedom expands when it is shared with a framework of cooperation and mutual understanding. The whole, in this sense, is greater than the sum of its parts. As history and experience have shown, there are no magical solutions. In moments of crisis, it is tempting to hope for a deus ex machina, a last-minute intervention that will resolve our challenges effortlessly. But as Aristotle criticized in Euripides' Medea, such external rescues are an illusion. The Greeks understood human beings as som politikon, a political being capable of collective action. Thus, rather than waiting for external force coming from the Olympus to change our destiny, we must embrace politics, diplomacy, dialogue, the active collective effort to build a more just and inclusive society for the Americans. In conclusion, the challenge of American countries at the G20 is not just an academic exercise, but a roadmap for the region's strategic engagement with the world. By embracing this perspective, the continent can assert itself as a proactive and constructive force in global affairs. Following this roadmap, Georgetown University, CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, Embajada Abierta Foundation, and the Organization of Ibero-American States are working together convinced, let me repeat it, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That there is no magical solution. Progress depends on hard work, goodwill, and strategic cooperation. Thank you very much.
Well, we are finishing after thanking again the Georgetown Americas Institute, after thanking again each one of you for your presence with us here today. I would like to close this gathering quoting what Luis Scasso just said. Multilateralism is not an option. Thank you very much.